Why was everyone laughing at him in the square, but not at her? The market in that distant city was alive with chatter, clinking glass, and the restless shuffle of sandals on stone. Tourists moved between stalls, cameras dangling from their necks. Vendors called out in 3 languages at once, selling trinkets, fruit, and coffee ground fine enough to slip through your fingers like sand. But she wasn't looking at them. She saw only the man in the center, older, out of place. A fedora tugged low, hands clasped behind his back as if he were studying architecture. They treated him like a tourist prop, a harmless foreigner in the wrong corner of the world. Children pointed at his shoes, vendors brushed past without offering samples, even soldiers on patrol let their gaze slide over him. She knew better, because she'd been told to watch him. Not because he was authority, not because he carried weight, but because one step of his would decide the future of her mission. And she hated it. The soldier in her wanted clean orders, clear objectives. She'd been trained to follow through with precision. Yet here she was, disguised in a linen scarf and borrowed sunglasses, pretending to browse trinkets while every sense inside her body screamed that something was about to break. Her chest tightened as she held a piece of polished brass in her hand. The reflection showed her jawline tense, her lips pressed too tightly. She forced herself to relax, to look like she belonged, but belonging was something she hadn't felt in years. Because what no one in that crowd knew, not the vendors, not the laughing tourists, not even the man in the fedora, was that she had a secret burning inside her. And if she misstepped here, the entire thing would unravel. The radio in her ear crackled once, faint, hidden beneath the buzz of the market. A man's voice, dry, clipped. "Target eyes on, confirm your position." She didn't answer right away. Her throat felt dry. She moved to another stall, lifted a scarf, let the fabric slip between her fingers. The smell of spices clung to the air, cinnamon, dust, and something faintly metallic, like blood left too long in the sun. "I'm here," she whispered finally, barely moving her lips. "Visual confirmed, he hasn't moved." There was silence then. Hold, wait for the step. That word again, step. She hated it because it wasn't strategy, it was prophecy. As though her entire mission, her years of sacrifice, her sleepless nights, all narrowed down to whether one man in a fedora lifted his foot left or right. The soldiers at briefing had laughed at her. She remembered their smirks, their whispered bets about whether she could even last in the field. "She's good with maps, good with drones," one of them had said, "but put her in a crowd and she'll freeze." They didn't know the cost of not freezing. She remembered the mountains back home, the weight of a folded flag pressed into her mother's trembling hands, the silence of a house too empty after the news came, her brother, her twin. His laugh still echoed in her mind. His boots still sat by the door, dust never shaken out. He'd gone because she told him she'd stay behind. He'd died because she thought she wasn't ready. She was here now because of him. So no, she would not freeze. Her hand brushed the inside of her sleeve. A knife, small and hidden, just enough to make someone stop if it came to that. She hated its weight but needed it there. A soldier without options was already dead. The man in the fedora shifted, tilted his head as if studying the carvings on a wall. Then the step, left foot forward, just one, casual to anyone else, monumental to her. Because it meant the meeting was real. The contact existed. And the mission had just begun. Her breath caught, but she let her body keep moving like a shopper. Her sunglasses hid her eyes, but inside she was already cataloging every movement around him. The boy with the fruit cart, the woman with the red scarf, the 2 soldiers smoking near the checkpoint. Each detail carved itself into her memory with surgical sharpness. The voice in her ear came again. "Copy, move to shadow position. Do not engage. Repeat, do not engage." She didn't need the reminder. Engagement meant exposure. Exposure meant failure. And failure meant the man she was really hunting, the ghost tied to her brother's death, would slip away again. The thought tightened her stomach, left her both burning and cold. Because she hadn't told anyone about that part. Not yet. She slid away from the stalls, weaving through tourists, keeping her body loose and her pace unhurried. But inside her head, thoughts flickered like static. This mission wasn't about politics, not about strategy. For her, it was personal. And no one around her, not her commander, not the man in the fedora, not even the voice in her ear, knew just how much she was willing to risk. The alleys beyond the square narrowed. Dust rose under each step. She felt her pulse quicken as she ducked into shadow, leaning against a wall where broken posters curled at the edges. The market noise dulled here, replaced by the hum of power lines and the distant thump of a generator. She exhaled slowly, then listened. Footsteps. But not his. Someone else. Her fingers brushed the knife again. Sweat gathered at the back of her neck despite the shade. She couldn't afford to be seen. Not yet. The footsteps grew closer. Then a boy appeared, barefoot, holding a tattered soccer ball under his arm. His eyes lingered on her scarf, her sunglasses, too long. She forced herself to smile, tilted her head slightly like any stranger passing through. The boy said nothing, just stared. Then finally he ran past. Her lungs released the breath she didn't know she'd been holding. This was what they didn't understand at briefing. It wasn't the firefights that broke you. It was the waiting, the holding of breath, the endless second-guessing of every sound, every shadow, every child who stared a little too long. And yet she couldn't tell them that. Because if she did, they'd call her weak. So she carried it silently, like she carried her brother's boots back home, like she carried every name that had been lost along the way. Another crackle in her ear. He's on the move, north side toward the river, confirmed visual. She peered from the shadows. The fedora man moved slow, deliberate, as if he had all the time in the world. To anyone else, he was nobody, but to her, he was the axis the world tilted on. "I've got him," she whispered. The voice in her ear stayed silent this time. Her pulse didn't. She followed, not too close, not too far. The sun cut harsh lines across the narrow streets, blinding in places, dark in others. She timed her pace with tourists, blending, disappearing. But every step she took was haunted by memory, by the image of a casket draped in a flag, by the sound of her mother's silence when the phone rang. And though her body was here, in this city, on this mission, her heart was somewhere else entirely. Somewhere she had promised herself she would never return until it was finished. Until he paid. The man she really hunted. The ghost behind the fedora. But she couldn't reveal that, not yet. Not to her team, not even to herself. Because sometimes vengeance doesn't speak. It waits. What was he carrying that made his hands so steady? The man in the fedora walked north, toward the river, his pace unhurried, almost casual. He looked like any visitor exploring a forgotten corner of the city. But she saw the details others ignored, the way his jacket brushed against his thigh, weighted slightly on one side. Not a limp, not imbalance. A concealment. Her pulse quickened. She adjusted her sunglasses, stepped back into the current of bodies on the street, letting herself become one more shadow among many. Her hand brushed her sleeve again, grounding herself with the feel of steel hidden there. She wasn't here to draw weapons, not yet. But her body remembered training, drills, nights under floodlights with instructors barking until her lungs burned. Now no one barked. Only silence pressed at her, broken by the hum of traffic and the rush of the river somewhere ahead. The voice in her ear returned, low, controlled. Maintain distance. Do not initiate. Remember your eyes, not hands. She bit down on her tongue, keeping herself from answering. Not because she hadn't heard, but because part of her wanted to defy it. Because the voice didn't understand what this meant to her. He, the man she hunted, the ghost tied to her brother's death, He was connected to this fedora figure. She knew it in her bones. And if she lost him now, if she let him slip into the cracks of this city, she might never find him again. But rules were rules. And rules had kept her alive this long. The narrow street spilled out into an open stretch near the riverbank. Children played with kites, their voices sharp against the heavy air. Old men smoked on steps, their faces carved with lines deeper than stone. The fedora man paused to look at the water, then adjusted his hat against the glare. She stayed back behind a parked truck, her eyes fixed on him. The sound of water lapping at the bank seemed louder than it should. Then movement. Another figure appeared, younger, dressed like a local but with shoes too new, too clean. He didn't approach directly, he circled, paused, waited, then slowly drifted closer as if by chance. The fedora man didn't turn, didn't acknowledge, but his left hand twitched once, a signal so small most would miss it. She didn't. Contact. Her throat tightened. This was the moment, the one brief window where the truth of this mission would reveal itself. But before she could lean closer, before she could catch their exchange, a shout cut through the air. A soldier at the checkpoint near the bridge yelled something sharp in the local tongue. His rifle shifted on its strap, his eyes scanning the crowd. The tension rippled outward like a shockwave. The boy with the kite froze. The younger contact hesitated. The fedora man finally turned, and for one heartbeat, his gaze cut across the crowd and locked with hers. Her stomach dropped. Did he see her? She looked away fast, pretending to adjust her scarf, pretending to study the river like any traveler might. But inside, her thoughts screamed. That one glance, too precise, too sharp, he knew. The voice in her ear cracked again. What's happening? Report now. She wanted to answer, but her mouth stayed dry. Because how could she explain what had just passed in that single look? It wasn't recognition, not exactly. It was something else. Awareness. And awareness was more dangerous than recognition. The younger man moved then, slipping closer to the fedora. A packet changed hands. Quick, discreet, barely a second. By the time a child laughed nearby, it was done. She caught her breath. Her entire mission hung on that transfer, proof, evidence, connection. Her body wanted to surge forward to close the gap, to rip the packet from their hands and demand answers about her brother's last mission, his last steps, his last breath. But she didn't, because she remembered his voice in her head, that last conversation before he left. You don't always win by firing the first shot, sis. Sometimes you win by waiting. So she waited. Her nails dug into her palm until pain grounded her again. She forced herself still, watching, memorizing every detail. The fedora man tucked the packet into his jacket. The younger contact drifted away, disappearing into the market flow like he'd never existed. The fedora turned once more toward the water, then began walking upriver, away from the checkpoint, away from the crowd. She followed. Her legs moved on instinct now, carrying her along uneven stones, past walls stained with old graffiti, past doorways where silence lived heavier than sound. She stayed just far enough to blur into the city's rhythm, but inside she was counting heartbeats, measuring distance. He ducked into an alley. She hesitated at the edge. The alley was narrow, blind at the far end, a trap. Her hand twitched toward her sleeve, then stopped. A memory struck her instead, her first training deployment overseas. The way she'd been ordered into a building without backup, told it was good practice to test her composure. She walked in alone, found nothing but dust, and when she'd walked out, her entire unit was laughing, a cruel initiation. She swallowed her shame, hidden it, but the memory cut sharp now as she stared into the alley. What if this was the same? What if they wanted her here alone, cornered? The voice in her ear broke through again. Status, you've gone dark, report. She whispered, following. Possible transfer confirmed, alley ahead, no visual on secondary. There was a pause, then. Hold position, repeat, do not enter, backup en route. She clenched her jaw. Backup. Backup was always en route. Backup was the lie you told yourself when you didn't want to admit you were on your own. The fedora man's shadow flickered deeper inside the alley. She had a choice. Wait and risk losing him. Or step forward and risk losing herself. Her brother's face rose in her mind. His grin, his hand ruffling her hair, the boots by the door, the folded flag. Her chest ached. She stepped in. The air cooled immediately, damp, heavy. The world outside muffled as though swallowed whole. She moved slow, steady. Her boots pressed dust into silence. Halfway down, she saw him. The fedora man stood still, back turned as if waiting. Her throat tightened. Every instinct screamed at her to stop, but she didn't. "Why me?" she whispered under her breath. The words weren't meant for him. They were meant for herself. And then he spoke. "I was wondering," his voice low, calm, "when they'd send you." Her stomach dropped. He wasn't just aware of her, he was expecting her. Her fingers brushed the knife in her sleeve, but she didn't draw it, not yet, because his tone wasn't threatening. It was curious, almost sad. She took one step closer, her voice steady though her heart raced. "You don't know me." He tilted his head slightly, not turning yet. "On the contrary," he said softly, "I know exactly who you are." Her chest burned. The silence around them felt too heavy, too final. The river's hum was gone. The market's chatter distant. Just the two of them in the shadow of stone and dust. And for the first time, she wondered, had she been the one hunting him? Or had he been waiting for her all along? Why didn't he turn to face her? The man in the fedora stood with his back toward her, his voice still carrying that calm weight, that impossible familiarity. The alley was silent except for the soft hum of electricity from a dangling wire overhead. Dust drifted through a shaft of light, each particle suspended like a clock frozen mid-second. She forced herself to breathe. Her hand brushed the knife in her sleeve, fingers flexing. If she moved too soon, it was over. If she waited too long, it might be over anyway. "You don't know me," she said again, this time louder, steady enough for her own ears. And then he finally turned. Slow, measured, as though every angle mattered. His eyes lifted under the brim of the fedora, sharp and steady, not with hostility but recognition. The kind of look that stripped away disguises, uniforms, scars, all the armor she'd built around herself. Her chest ached, because in that gaze she saw something she hadn't expected. "Grief." "You carry his eyes," he said quietly. Her body locked, words died on her tongue. He stepped closer, only half a stride, but it felt like an advance across years, across oceans. His hand didn't reach for a weapon. He didn't need to. His words cut deeper. "Your brother." Her throat tightened. Heat rose behind her eyes, but she forced it back, refusing to let tears betray her strength. The folded flag, the boots by the door, the silence of her mother's kitchen, all of it slammed against her chest at once. "How do you know his name?" she demanded. He didn't answer right away. His silence stretched heavy. The sound of her own pulse filled the space. She thought of drawing the knife, of ending this before it unraveled further, but something stopped her. Because she wanted answers more than she wanted blood. Finally he spoke. "I was there." Her knees almost buckled. She clenched her jaw so tightly it ached. "You're lying." He shook his head slowly. "No, I stood in the dust that day. I heard his voice. I saw his last step." Her breath hitched. The world tilted. The image of her brother alive, laughing, teasing, calling her by that childhood nickname only he used, crashed into the image of his coffin lowered into earth. And this man, this stranger cloaked in shadows, was stitching those two images together. Her voice cracked, anger rising like fire. "Then why are you still breathing?" He didn't flinch, didn't move back. Because he chose it that way. The words hit her harder than a bullet. Chose? No, her brother hadn't chosen death. He hadn't chosen to leave her, to leave their mother, to vanish into folded cloth and photographs. He was forced, betrayed. That was the story she had carried in her chest like iron for years. But the fedora man stood there calm, as though he carried a different truth entirely. Her knife hand trembled, not from fear, from rage. "You expect me to believe that?" she hissed. "I don't expect you to believe anything," he said softly. "I expect you to listen, because if you don't, you'll make the same mistake he did." The silence stretched again, heavy, fragile. And in that silence, her brother's voice returned, as if whispering from the past. "Sometimes you win by waiting." Her grip loosened, just barely. The radio in her ear crackled suddenly, a sharp voice. "Status, where are you? Report immediately." She flinched. Her eyes flicked to the alley mouth, expecting shadows, backup, exposure. But no one came. Only static hissed, demanding an answer. She didn't move. Didn't speak. Because the man in front of her was watching closely. And she knew, the moment she broke eye contact, the truth would vanish into smoke. So she pulled the earpiece from her ear, slid it into her pocket. The silence deepened, more dangerous now, but also more hers. He exhaled once, as if relieved. "You're smarter than they think." Her jaw tightened. "Start talking." He nodded slightly, then looked past her, deeper into the shadows of the alley, as though replaying a memory only he could see. "Your brother wasn't abandoned. He wasn't betrayed. He volunteered." The word cut her again. Volunteered. "No," she snapped. "He was ordered. He didn't have a choice." A flicker crossed the man's eyes, something like pity. "You think choice is clean? That orders make men machines. He had orders, yes. But what he did in his last minute, that was his choice. And it saved lives you'll never know about." Her throat burned. Her body shook. Because part of her wanted to tear him apart for saying it. And another part, the part that had lived with guilt for years, wanted desperately for it to be true. She whispered, broken. "Then why didn't anyone tell me?" He looked at her for a long moment, then said, "Because grief is easier when it has someone to blame." The words hollowed her out. She staggered one step back, hitting the wall. The knife felt heavier than stone now. Her brother had been her compass, her anchor, her proof that she belonged in a world that always doubted her. If what this man said was true, then she had built her rage on a lie. She wanted to scream, to strike, to deny it all, but her body betrayed her, standing frozen in silence. The fedora man adjusted his jacket. "There are things you don't know yet, things you need to see with your own eyes, but you won't find them here, in alleys, in markets, in shadows." Her breath came uneven. "Where?" He studied her carefully. "When you're ready." It wasn't an answer, it was a burden. She opened her mouth to demand more, but a sound interrupted. Footsteps, quick, approaching. Soldiers. Her blood surged cold. The fedora man's gaze sharpened, then softened again. He stepped back, deeper into the alley's shadow. "They'll never believe you," he said softly. "Not yet. And if you tell them I was here, you'll lose the only thread that still ties you to him." Her pulse thundered. The footsteps grew louder. Shouts in the local tongue echoed off stone. She turned toward the noise, then back. And he was gone. The alley was empty. Her knife clattered against her sleeve as her hand dropped, trembling. The soldiers appeared at the mouth of the alley, rifles at the ready, eyes scanning. One barked at her to show her hands. She lifted them slowly, the lie already forming on her tongue. Because she couldn't tell them, not yet. Not about him, not about what he said, not about the truth that was either salvation or poison. Her brother's ghost pressed against her chest, heavier than ever. And she realized, for the first time in years, she was afraid. Not of failure, but of finally learning the truth. Why did the lie come so easily to her lips? The soldiers blocked the alley mouth, rifles angled low but ready, their eyes narrowing as they studied her. Dust swirled between them, the echo of their boots ringing too loudly in her ears. She raised her hands, scarf slipping slightly at her shoulder. "I was following him," she said, her voice calm, almost detached. "A pickpocket. He cut through here." One soldier muttered something to the other. Their suspicion lingered, but not sharp enough to pierce her disguise. The younger one pointed his rifle barrel at the ground, motioning her back toward the street. "Tourist," he muttered, half with disdain, half with boredom. Her pulse slowed only when she stepped into sunlight again. The market sounds rushed back all at once, laughter, bargaining, clinking glass. Too bright, too loud after the silence of the alley. But inside her chest, nothing had returned to normal. Her hand trembled as she pulled the sunglasses tighter over her eyes, hiding what they threatened to spill. That man, his words, the way he'd spoken of her brother, not as an enemy, not even as a soldier, but as a human being who had chosen his last step. It cracked something inside her she'd kept sealed for years. The radio in her pocket buzzed, again, persistent. She slid the earpiece back in. "Where the hell were you?" The voice was sharp, irritated. "You broke comms mid-tale. Report." Her throat dried, she swallowed. "Target moved through the north alley. I lost visual." A pause, static, then, "Copy. Return to extraction point. We'll reassess." It was the right answer. Clean. Devoid of the truth that burned like acid inside her. Because if she told them what really happened, if she told them that the target had spoken to her, had known her, had tied himself to her brother, the mission would change. They strip her from the field, maybe pull her back entirely. And she couldn't allow that. Not now, not when she was closer than she had ever been. Her boots carried her away from the river, deeper into the maze of streets. Each step echoed with memory. The folded flag, her mother's shaking shoulders, her brother's grin the day he enlisted, his promise that she wouldn't have to bear the weight he would. And now this stranger's voice tangled inside it all, rewriting the story she had told herself every night to keep the rage alive. What if she had been wrong? What if her grief had turned her into something hollow, chasing shadows because they were easier than truth? The thought gnawed at her. She reached the extraction point, an old van disguised as a delivery vehicle, paint peeling, back doors half open. Inside, two men waited. Both looked at her, unspeaking, as she climbed in. One handed her a bottle of water. She nodded, drank, letting the coolness wash the dust from her throat. The silence between them wasn't camaraderie. It was suspicion. Soldiers learned to read the air around someone returning from the field, and hers was thick with something unsaid. The van rumbled to life, pulling away from the square. She leaned her head against the rattling wall, eyes closed behind her glasses, but rest didn't come. Instead, the memory of the alley replayed. His eyes, his words, he chose. The knife in her sleeve pressed against her wrist, a reminder of the choice she hadn't made. By the time the van reached the safe house, night had settled. The air carried the tang of smoke from cooking fires, the distant bark of dogs. She stepped out, her legs stiff, her mind heavier than her body. Inside, the safe house was dim, bare walls, one flickering bulb, maps spread across a table. Her commanding officer looked up, his jaw tight. "Well," her tongue pressed against her teeth, she forced her voice steady. "Target confirmed. Contact made. Evidence of a packet exchange. I lost visual after the alley." The officer studied her. His gaze was sharp, not unkind but unforgiving. He leaned back, folding his arms. "You lost him?" "Yes, sir." The silence stretched. One of the men muttered under his breath. Another shook his head slightly, scribbling notes. Her chest tightened. She wanted to scream, to tell them it wasn't a loss, that it was something bigger, heavier, more human than any mission file could capture. But she swallowed it. Because they wouldn't understand. Not yet. Her officer finally spoke. Get some rest. We regroup at dawn. If he's local, he won't vanish overnight. Rest, the word felt like a mockery. She lay on the thin cot in the corner, staring at the cracked ceiling. Outside, the city hummed traffic, voices, a motorbike whining somewhere distant. But inside her head, only silence. And then a sound broke it. Soft, familiar. Her brother's laugh. Not real, not here, just memory. But it came so vividly she could almost feel him sitting beside her, teasing her for how tightly she always wound her scarf, how she triple-checked her gear, how she carried more weight on her shoulders than any one person should. Her chest ached. She turned on her side, pressing her forehead against her arm. Sleep didn't come, only fragments, shadows, his voice, and the fedora man's words echoing over it all. Because grief is easier when it has someone to blame. When dawn broke, her eyes were still open. The briefing was sharp, clipped, efficient. Satellite maps, checkpoints, predictions of where the target might move next. She nodded, she listened, she played her part, but her thoughts ran elsewhere. Because she knew something they didn't. He hadn't just been another shadow to track. He had been waiting, for her, for this. And if that was true, then the mission wasn't surveillance anymore. It was personal. By midday, she found herself back on the streets. Different disguise this time, cap pulled low, jacket torn at the edges. Her pace slow, eyes scanning not just for him but for traces, signs, fragments of a pattern. Hours passed, heat pressed down, dust clung to her throat, still nothing. Until a flicker. On the far side of the market, near a shuttered shop, she saw him. The fedora, the steady gait, the weight in his jacket. Her pulse surged. But this time, he wasn't alone. A boy walked beside him, 12, maybe 13, thin, eyes hollow. The man's hand rested lightly on the boy's shoulder, guiding him through the crowd, not force, not threat, almost protection. Her stomach turned. Because in that instant she saw something she hadn't expected, a man not hiding, a man carrying. The boy clutched a small cloth bag, too careful, too deliberate. Something was inside. She followed. Closer this time, heart hammering, body loose, ready. The man led the boy through the streets, away from the market, toward the edge of the city where the buildings thinned and the land sloped toward the hills. Each step carried her further from safety, further from backup. But she didn't stop. Because the boy's hollow eyes haunted her. And because deep down she knew this wasn't just about her brother anymore. It was about who she was becoming. The man in the fedora paused at a doorway, speaking softly to the boy. Then he glanced once over his shoulder. Straight at her. Not surprised, not alarmed. Inviting. Then he disappeared inside, the boy following. Her chest tightened, her hand brushed the knife again. And for the second time in 2 days, she stood at the edge of a doorway, faced with a choice. Step in, or walk away. Her brother's voice whispered, sometimes you win by waiting. But she had already waited too long. So she stepped forward. The doorway loomed before her like a fracture in the world, narrow, dark, its edges crumbling under years of neglect. The boy had vanished inside with the man in the fedora, leaving behind only the ghost of their footsteps on the stone. Her chest heaved once, twice, then steadied. She adjusted the scarf around her neck, pressing herself flat against the wall. The sun had slipped lower, casting shadows that stretched across the street. The hum of the market was gone now, replaced by the brittle silence of the city's edge. Her knife was still there waiting, her calm still silent. But none of that mattered. What mattered was what lay inside. She inhaled slow, then stepped across the threshold. The air inside was cooler, damp with the smell of earth and old wood. Her boots sank slightly into dust as she moved forward, ears straining for sound. Somewhere deeper she caught it, a low murmur, the cadence of a man's voice, words too soft to parse. Then the boy's reply, barely a whisper. She crept forward, back to the wall, her fingers brushing the rough plaster. The hallway was narrow, splitting into shadows that clawed at the corners. Each step echoed like thunder in her chest. She reached the room at the end. A sliver of light cut across the floor. Through the crack in the door she saw them. The fedora man sat at a table, jacket draped across the back of his chair. The boy stood beside him, clutching the cloth bag like it was life itself. The man's hands moved gently, untying the bag's knot. He spoke softly, words patient, almost fatherly. The boy hesitated, then let go. From inside the bag the man drew out papers, not money, not weapons, papers, folded, worn. He smoothed them carefully on the table like something sacred. Her breath caught. Not contraband, not tactical documents. The boy shifted, nervous. The man placed a hand lightly on his shoulder, grounding him. Then, as if he had known she was there all along, the man spoke, not to the boy. To her. You hide your footsteps well, he said, voice calm, unhurried. But grief always makes more noise than boots. Her pulse spiked. The boy's head snapped toward the door, wide, hollow eyes fixed on her shadow. Her grip tightened on the knife. But the fedora man didn't move. He didn't reach for a weapon, didn't rise. Instead, he gestured to the chair across from him. Come see what truth looks like. Her body tensed. Every protocol screamed against it, but something heavier than orders pulled her forward. She pushed the door open. The boy flinched, but the man's hand calmed him. Her boots scuffed the floor as she entered, knife still in hand. The chair sat waiting, empty. She stopped just short. Who are you? Her voice was sharp, the steel edge of control. The man tilted his head, eyes studying her the way a surgeon studies a wound. Someone who remembers your brother not by the way he died, but by the choice he made before it. Her throat tightened. The boy clutched the table's edge, as if bracing against the weight of words he didn't understand. She forced her tone steady. You're lying. If I were, you would have killed me yesterday. The silence that followed was heavier than any rifle fire she'd ever endured. She lowered the knife slightly, not surrendering, just shifting. Her eyes flicked to the papers on the table, worn passports, old photographs. One showed the boy, younger, clinging to a woman's hand. Another, her stomach clenched, showed soldiers in uniform, foreign insignia, men with the same haunted eyes she had seen in her brother's final photograph. These are what he carried, the fedora man said, sliding the papers gently toward her. Not weapons, not propaganda, faces, names. He kept them safe until he couldn't. Her hand hovered above the table. She didn't take them, couldn't. Why? She whispered. The man leaned back, folding his hands. Because sometimes the war takes more than lives. It takes memory, and memory is the only rebellion left. The boy's eyes darted between them, searching, unsure. Her chest constricted. For years she had told herself her brother died in service of a cause, for duty, for country. But now this stranger told her he had carried something else, something human, something fragile. And the certainty she had clung to shattered like glass. She stepped back, the knife trembled in her hand. I should kill you, she said, though the words lacked weight. The fedora man's gaze held hers, unflinching. Then do it. But if you do, the boy loses the last piece of his family, just as you lost yours. The boy's breath hitched. His thin fingers clenched the edge of the table. Her knife lowered another inch. She hated him for knowing her so deeply, for twisting the wound open, for forcing her to see what she had fought so hard to bury. Her calm crackled suddenly in her ear, a sharp voice. Echo 3 report, are you on target? Her breath faltered. She pulled the earpiece out, shoving it into her pocket. The fedora man's lips curved faintly, not in victory, but in recognition. You're not here for their mission anymore. Her hand trembled. Her brother's laugh ghosted in her ear. The boy's hollow eyes clung to hers like an anchor. And for the first time, she didn't know who she was fighting for. Night deepened outside the broken windows, shadows stretching across the room. She hadn't moved in minutes. The papers still sat between them, heavy with a truth she wasn't ready to lift. Finally, the man rose slowly, calmly. He placed his fedora back on his head. His voice was quiet, steady. "You're not ready to believe me, but you will be." He touched the boy's shoulder, guiding him toward the back door. The boy clutched the bag again, his small frame almost swallowed by the weight of it. She didn't stop them, couldn't. As the door closed behind them, the silence was deafening. Her knife dangled useless in her hand. Her mission was gone. What remained was something far more dangerous. Doubt. She didn't remember walking back to the safe house. Only the feel of the night air, cold against her burning skin, and the echo of his words chasing her every step. By the time she reached the cot again, dawn was already staining the sky pale. And she knew one thing with clarity sharper than steel. The mission hadn't failed. It had only just begun. What happens when silence speaks louder than confession? That question haunted her the morning she returned. The safe house hummed with a low tension, radios buzzing, boots scraping against the cracked tile. Men and women leaned over maps, marked targets, and spoke in clipped tones. Everything looked the same. Everything sounded the same. But something had shifted. Sorry. She stood at the threshold, the smell of stale coffee and dust wrapping around her. The cot where she had tried to rest hours ago sat untouched, yet she couldn't bring herself to sit. Her commander, Major Harlan, raised his eyes from the table, stern, unreadable. His gaze pinned her like a hawk pins prey. "You disappeared off comms last night." The words were calm, but beneath them lay suspicion. Her throat was dry. She forced her voice steady. "Signal dropped, static. I reestablished when I could." It wasn't a lie, not entirely, but it wasn't the truth either. The other soldiers glanced at her briefly, then looked away. The kind of glance that says everything without words. She was different, tainted. Major Harlan tapped his finger on the map, slow, deliberate. "Echo 3, when I send you out I expect reports, not silence." Her jaw tightened. She nodded once curt. "Yes, sir." The conversation ended, but the tension didn't. She slipped away to the corner, sitting on the cot, hands clasped between her knees. Her fingers trembled before she curled them into fists. The boy's hollow eyes wouldn't leave her mind. The fedora man's words pressed like a blade against her chest. "If you do, the boy loses the last piece of his family, just as you lost yours." She stared at the floor, heart pounding. What was she now? Soldier, liar, traitor, or just a sister still chasing ghosts? The hours dragged, patrol schedules rotated, briefings whispered, weapons cleaned, but her mind was elsewhere. She caught herself studying the cracks in the wall, tracing lines as if they could map out her confusion. Then, Tors. Her name snapped like a whip. She lifted her head. One of the younger soldiers, Vega, stood before her, barely 22. His eyes were sharp but weary, his face lined by nights of too little sleep and too many fears. He hesitated, then sat on the edge of the cot, close but not too close. "You all right?" he asked. She blinked, caught off guard. "Why?" "You're quieter than usual," he shrugged, rubbing his palms together. "Quieter than me, even, and that's saying something." A small breath slipped from her, almost a laugh, almost a sob. She shook her head. "I'm fine." But Vega didn't buy it. His gaze stayed steady. "My brother was like that," he said suddenly. "Quiet when he was hurting, wouldn't say it. Thought silence made him stronger." He paused. "Didn't, just made him heavier." She turned to him, surprised. Vega rarely spoke of home. "What happened to him?" she asked softly. Vega's lips pressed thin. He picked at the edge of his sleeve. He didn't come back, not from his last deployment. Nobody told me how, just that he didn't. His voice cracked on the last word, almost invisible. Her chest tightened. For a moment they weren't soldier and soldier, just brother and sister both carrying ghosts. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He nodded, staring at the floor. Then he stood abruptly, brushing the moment away like dust. "Just don't carry it alone, Tors. It'll eat you." And then he was gone. But his words stayed. That night she couldn't sleep. She lay on the cot, staring at the ceiling, every creak of the building echoing like footsteps. Her comm device sat on the table, silent. She picked it up, turned it over in her hand, stared at the tiny blinking light. With a breath, she switched it off and slipped out into the night. The streets were quieter now, empty except for stray dogs and the whisper of wind through alleyways. Her boots crunched softly against broken stone. Her heart raced with each turn, each shadow. When she reached the fractured doorway, she froze, the same one she had stepped through before. Now it felt different, heavier. She pushed it open. The air inside was the same, cool, damp, carrying the scent of dust and earth. But the room was empty. No boy, no man, no papers. Only silence. Her chest hollowed. She stepped forward, scanning every corner. The table still sat there, but bare. The chair was pushed back as if someone had left in haste. On the floor near the wall, something small glinted. She bent down, picked it up. A button, black worn. She remembered it from the boy's shirt. Her breath caught. They were gone. But where? Behind her, a floorboard creaked. Her knife flashed into her hand, reflex sharp, stance low. "Easy." The voice stopped her cold. From the shadows stepped the fedora man. Alone this time. No boy. His hands were empty, raised slightly, palms out. "You came back." His tone carried neither surprise nor mockery, just fact. Her knife trembled, pointed at him. "Where is he?" "Safe." "Where?" Her voice cracked, sharper than she meant. The man tilted his head, studying her. "You want to protect him now." Her chest heaved. Her knife pressed forward an inch. "Answer me." But instead of fear, he stepped closer. His eyes caught the faint light, calm, unwavering. "Why?" he asked softly. "Why does it matter to you?" Her lips parted, but no sound came. She wanted to say, "Because I'm a soldier," or "Because it's my mission," or "Because I owe my brother." But the words died. Because none of them were true anymore. Finally she whispered, "Because he has no one." The fedora man's expression shifted just slightly, a crack in stone. "And neither do you." The silence after that felt unbearable. She lowered the knife slowly, not in surrender, in exhaustion. Her voice was barely breath. "Tell me where he is." The man's gaze held hers, long, searching. Then he said, "When it's time." He stepped back into the shadows, his figure melting into the dark. Her hand reached forward instinctively, but he was gone. Only silence remained. She staggered back against the wall, chest heaving, button clutched in her fist. Her mission was unraveling. Her truth was unraveling. But one thing had crystallized. The boy was alive, somewhere. And now she couldn't turn back. By dawn, she returned to the safe house. Major Harlan was waiting, arms crossed, eyes sharp. "You're late." Her jaw clenched. She opened her mouth, but no excuse came. He studied her, gaze hard, searching. Then he leaned in, his voice low, edged. "I don't like ghosts, Tors. If you're carrying one, bury it, before it buries us." Her heart pounded. She nodded once. "Yes, sir." But inside she knew. She wasn't burying anything. She was chasing it. How long can someone hold a secret before it begins to show in their eyes? She felt it every hour now, the weight pressing on her, the way glances lingered too long, the silence that followed her footsteps. Soldiers knew when someone was hiding something. You could smell it in the air, like gunpowder before a shot. The safe house wasn't safe anymore. Major Harlan's orders came sharp at dawn. A new sweep. A suspected cell not far from where she had wandered the night before. His voice was clipped, final, leaving no room for hesitation. Echo Team moves in 10. Towards your point. Point, the one who enters first. The one who takes the first look, the first risk. She nodded, though her stomach nodded. Her gear felt heavier that morning, every strap digging into her shoulders, every buckle pressing into bone. Vega caught her eye as they prepped. His look wasn't suspicion. It was worry, quiet, searching worry. She strapped her rifle and moved out. The streets wore their silence like armor. Empty windows stared down at them. Dogs darted between alleys. Their boots struck rhythm on broken concrete. She scanned each corner, each doorway, but her mind wasn't clear. The fedora man's words still circled like hawks overhead. And neither do you. Her hand tightened on her rifle. They reached the target building, a squat structure, its walls fractured by time and war, paint peeled like skin. The air smelled of damp cloth and smoke. Major Harlan signaled. She moved forward. The door creaked open beneath her hand. Inside, the air was stale, thick with dust. Shadows clung to the corners. She raised her rifle, scanning, stepping carefully. Room 1 clear. Room 2 clear. She moved deeper, boots silent, breath steady. Then she saw it. On the table in the back room, a bag, cloth, familiar. Her chest seized. She moved closer, rifle trembling in her grip. The same bag the boy had carried, torn on the corner, patched by hand. But empty now. Her throat tightened. She turned sharply and froze. The boy, standing in the corner, eyes wide, hollow, his shirt missing the button she held in her pocket. Her rifle lowered an inch before she could stop it. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Before she could move, a heavy hand clamped her shoulder. Major Harlan. His eyes followed hers, landed on the boy, narrowed. Target secured, he said flatly into his comm. The boy flinched, shrinking against the wall. No, the word escaped her before she could catch it. Harlan's head snapped toward her, his eyes sharp, cutting. What was that, Tors? Her pulse pounded in her ears. The boy's breath hitched. She forced steel into her voice. He's just a kid. Kid or not, he's leverage, Harlan snapped. Get him restrained. Her hands trembled on her rifle. Restrain him, deliver him, to what end? Her brother's face flickered in her mind, the same hollow eyes, the same fear. Vega's voice cut through the silence. Sir, maybe we should. Not maybe, soldier, Harlan barked. Now. The boy whimpered softly, eyes darting to her, pleading. And in that moment, everything inside her broke. Her rifle lowered completely. I won't, she said quietly. The room froze. Harlan's gaze darkened. The weight of command pressed into every syllable when he spoke. Tors, do not disobey me. Her heart pounded, her chest heaved, but her voice came steady, sharp. He's not the enemy. The silence that followed was suffocating. Vega shifted uneasily, glancing between them. The other soldiers raised their rifles, confusion etched in their faces. Harlan's jaw clenched. You're compromised. Her pulse hammered. She stepped in front of the boy, body a shield. Her rifle hung at her side now, but her presence was firm. The boy clutched the back of her jacket, trembling. Harlan's voice was low, dangerous. Move now. Her chest burned. Every instinct screamed at her to obey, to follow the chain of command, to protect her career. But something deeper screamed louder. She shook her head slowly. No. The air snapped like a wire pulled too tight. Harlan raised his pistol, eyes cold. and for a heartbeat, she thought he would pull the trigger. But then, enough. The voice came from the doorway, calm, grounded. The fedora man stepped inside. Every rifle swung toward him, but he didn't flinch, didn't raise his hands. He simply walked forward, his gaze locked on Harlan. "You've mistaken memory for threat," he said quietly. "That boy carries nothing but truth." Harlan's lip curled. "Identify yourself." The man stopped, his shadow long against the wall. "Someone who knew her brother." Her breath caught. The boy pressed tighter against her back. Harlan's pistol didn't waver. "You have 3 seconds to make yourself useful before you hit the floor." The fedora man smiled faintly, not mocking, sad. "You can kill me, but it won't change what's written. Not in these walls, not in him." His eyes flicked toward the boy, then back to her. Her chest ached. And then chaos. A shout outside, boots on stone, another unit, reinforcements. The building shook with the weight of approaching soldiers. Harlan snarled, signaling his team. "Extract now." The fedora man moved fast, stepping to her side, his hand brushing her arm. "Choose," he whispered. Her breath hitched. Stay with her unit, obey orders, or follow the boy into the unknown. The rifles around her raised. The boy's grip tightened on her jacket. Her lungs burned. And in the storm of that moment, she knew this was the fracture, the point of no return. They burst from the back of the building. Gunfire cracked, shouts split the air. Dust and debris rained down as boots pounded. The fedora man pulled the boy ahead, guiding him through the narrow alleyways. She followed, rifle clutched, heart thundering. Behind them, Harlan's voice roared. "Tors, stand down." But she didn't. She couldn't. Each step away from her unit tore something inside her, but each step toward the boy filled the hollow. They sprinted through the city's veins, slipping through cracks, weaving through shadows. Her chest burned, her muscles screamed, but she didn't stop. Not until the night swallowed them whole. When they finally stopped, breathless, the boy collapsed against the wall, gasping. She dropped beside him, hand on his shoulder. His skin was warm, damp with sweat, trembling beneath her palm. The fedora man stood over them, breathing steady, eyes on the horizon. "You've chosen," he said quietly. Her throat was raw. Her voice broke when she spoke. "I chose wrong." He shook his head, kneeling in front of her. "No, you chose human." Her chest tightened. Tears burned hot behind her eyes. She forced them down, but her voice trembled. "They'll hunt me, my own." "Yes," he said simply, "but now you're free to remember, as he did." Her brother's face flooded her again. His smile, his sacrifice, the weight of memory she had buried too long. The boy's small hand slipped into hers, fragile, trembling, trusting. Her eyes closed, tears sliding silent down her cheek. For the first time in years, she felt something other than grief. She felt purpose. But purpose doesn't silence the sound of boots. And in the distance, faint, but closing fast, she heard them. Her unit. Her hunters. The night didn't end. Not for her, not for the ones who had followed her this far. The base was silent now, quieter than it had been in years. Generators hummed. Radios crackled. Somewhere, boots scuffed on the gravel, but no one spoke. They didn't need to. She sat alone on the edge of the tarmac, helmet off, hair loose against the breeze. Her rifle lay across her knees, heavy but familiar, a weight that steadied more than it burdened. For the first time in days, her shoulders lowered. The fight was over. But inside, something lingered. She remembered every face, the ones who stood with her, the ones she lost, the ones who doubted her until the very last second, and the ones who, quietly, had believed. The mission was written up as a success, a clean operation, tactical efficiency, collateral minimized, losses acceptable. But no paper, no report, no briefing could capture what it really cost. Her hand trembled as she lit a cigarette she didn't even want. Not for the smoke, for the pause, the ritual. The flame sparked against the wind, then steadied, glowing like the faintest promise. She thought of her father, his voice, the way he used to say, dignity isn't about speeches, it's about choices no one sees. She hadn't understood him then, she did now. Because tonight, no one would see her cry. Not the soldiers who still thought of her as unshakable. Not the commanders who already turned her name into a line of data. Not even the ghosts who sat beside her in silence. She let the tears fall anyway, quiet, without apology. The air smelled of jet fuel and dust. Above, the stars hung like a ceiling she could almost touch. She remembered being a child once, looking up at the same sky, wondering if courage was something people were born with, or if it came only when everything else was stripped away. Now she knew. It wasn't courage, it was endurance. It was showing up when no one asked you to. It was carrying weight no one else wanted. It was silence and fire and grief and hope, all stitched into one body that simply refused to break. A voice broke the stillness. "Major." She turned. It was Ramirez. His eyes carried the same exhaustion, the same cracks. He hesitated, then offered nothing but a canteen of water. No words, just the gesture. She took it, drank, nodded. And that was enough. The sun had not yet risen, but a pale silver traced the horizon. The first sign that the night, this endless night, would eventually surrender. She stood, joints stiff, lungs tight, but her stance steady. Behind her the base began to stir. Engines warming, orders forming. The world kept moving. But she lingered. One last breath. One last moment alone with the silence that had carried her this far. Then she walked back toward the others, toward the duty, the weight, the living. No one applauded, no one saluted, no one cheered. And yet in that quiet, something eternal settled into place. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. And she had acted. The rest would never need to be said.